west side of the house.
Well, I think we all want to know what happens underwater.
We had a chair.
Yeah. Gives me a headache looking at the helmet.
Oh, yeah.
That's what my dive instructor said. I know, I'll just find the dive.
Yeah, I see that.
Hope things are okay with you folks.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I agree with
Right.
being a rose.
Playing it by ear. Yes, that's nice and general.
That may be a dangerous place for you right
Yes, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
They can't hear me this way. They can hear me this way. Okay. Thank you all for coming. This is a great crowd. This will be our last Listen, Laugh, and Learn until September. So it looks like we really have a good send-off with Sam and his very exciting job under the ocean. You know, I'm from Wyoming. I can hardly swim. It was just frightening to read about what he did. But this is Sam Humphrey. And if you can't hear him, why don't you just raise your hand, because sometimes you forget to go like this and you need us to remind you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as you said, I'm Sam Humphrey. I was born in 1961 in Moscow, Idaho, and raised in North Idaho, Western Montana, Eastern Washington, and
Can you hear?
So it's kind of funny that somebody in my situation would get into diving, but I watched a lot of National Geographic and Jacques Cousteau and stuff growing up and was always interested in it. And when I got into high school, I took scuba diving and fell in love with being under the water, and thought I got to figure out how I can make money working underwater. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about commercial diving. I didn't know anything about really scuba diving until I got into it. And and that's me on my scuba license that I got when I was 16 years old. In the junior, we can go to the next picture. So, okay, so that's me scuba diving down in Florida underwater. I think I was only about 15 or 20 feet. You can go to the next picture. That's coming out of the water. And that's in Puget Sound. That's a sunflower star. So I would spend a bunch of time underwater, and I just fell in love with it. And I was like, I gotta make money. So I joined the Navy to become a diver, because being from the Midwest, I didn't, there's no schools or anything. I figured everybody goes in the Navy to learn how to be a diver, and that didn't work. So you can go to the next picture. So I ended up, spent 4 years in the Navy and had a little issue with authority and stuff, and didn't get out with the best stuff. But anyway, never got into diving from that. But while I was in the Navy, a friend of mine that I scuba dived with in high school found a commercial diving school in Seattle. There was two actually in Seattle, and he gave me the information, and so I looked into them. And the day I got out of the Navy, I went down to the dive school and applied, and there was actually a year waiting list. So I got another job as a mechanic while I was waiting to go to dive school. But this was about a year into dive school. We started diving the heavy gear, that outfit, and you can see the helmet over there and the boots. That's called heavy gear, and that's the stuff that was invented back in the 1870s or 1880s, and the Navy's been using that. They still use it somewhat, and some commercial companies in San Francisco still use it, but it's not very common anymore. But that whole outfit weighs about 205 pounds. The helmet itself is 58 pounds, the helmet and breastplate. And the boots are 17 pounds a piece, so 34 pounds for the pair. And then we usually wear a 180-pound weight belt on top of it to keep us down. But when you're down in the water, you can fill your suit up with air and float. You can actually swim in that outfit. And it's actually my favorite diving outfit just because it is pretty versatile. But it's really hard to get, if you're doing decompression diving, it's really hard to get out of the suit fast. It takes probably half an hour to get in and out of that suit. The new stuff, more popular stuff, we call it lightweight gear. And that's my purple hat that's on the end of the table there. That hat weighs 35 pounds. Then we have to wear a bailout bottle with that, which is another 20 pounds, and we might wear 10 pounds of weight. So we're looking at, 70 or 80 pounds for the light gear versus 200 pounds for the heavy gear. And the light gear is a lot smaller, so you can, if we have to do pipe penetrations and that kind of thing, you can get into smaller spaces. It's a little more versatile. And it only takes a few minutes, like 2 minutes to get in and out of it. So that's what we use if we do any kind of decompression diving. So we can see what the next picture. That's me underwater in the heavy gear. You go to the next picture. That's climbing. There was a 30-foot ladder that we had to climb to get into the water with that gear. So that some guys in school, we spent a month diving that gear, and a lot of guys would weed out. They decide, yeah, this is too much. I can't do it. But that's my teacher, my dive instructor. He gives us a hard time. He's like, yeah, get back down in the water. That's what he got his foot on my head. Yeah, that's fine. So we go to the next picture and see where we're at. And that's my dive class. It started out 26 people, ended up with 14.
Wow.
And one of them, if you see it, let's see, the middle one, the third from the right, is a girl. She was 5'2", weighed 98 pounds. She couldn't climb out that ladder with all the gear on. And the instructor told her if she can't get up the ladder, she's not passing the class. So me and 2 other guys climbed down the ladder and took her weight belt off and her boots off, and so she could climb up the ladder just wearing the hat. And everybody else thought, a lot of the other guys in the class thought, she's not going to class, and the teacher's going to be mad. But he was actually really happy because he said the main thing about diving is you help each other out, you keep each other alive. And so we all got good marks for that. And she ended up passing the class and got into the dive industry after that. So actually, out of all those guys in 14, the first, let's see, 12 of them got jobs. 12 of us got jobs right off the bat. And within a year, there was only 5 of us less diving. In 10 years, I was the only one out of my class diving still. And that's normal for all the schools. People go into it, and within 5 years, 70 or 80% of the people that started are out of it. So we can go to, and that's me in the light gear. That's working on Lower Granite Dam. It was night. I worked night shift a lot, but that's a full cold water suit. So that, where you can see the bailout bottle and my dive hat and everything. That all, my weight belt, it's about 80 pounds worth of gear there. We can go on the next week. So the big, and this is, Madison Dam. But I got into scuba diving, and then you get into commercial diving. And everywhere I go on these dams, I started working a lot on the dams and bridges in the Northwest. My very first job actually was in Cody, Wyoming. I worked on the Buffalo Bill Dam in 1986 on the Shoshone River. We came over because they were raising the dam 25 feet, and they needed a bunch of inspection work, and they had to do some underwater work and stuff, so they could work on the design of what they needed to do. So I worked, and that was the very first commercial job in Cody, Wyoming. And when I work with these guys on these dams who have never worked dam people, with divers and stuff before, they always call us scuba divers. And scuba divers and commercial divers are 2 completely different things. And the best way that I can describe it to all the people that I work with is scuba divers are like city slickers that come and work on a dude ranch. And commercial divers are the cowboys that are actually working the ranch. That's about the difference between scuba divers and commercial divers. And that's working still at Madison Dam. That's Madison Dam. We were cleaning, those are trash rack cleaners. We're cleaning moss off the dam. And that's 2 helmets that we had inside the dive shack. We always had 2 helmets on line. We have the guy who's diving, and then we have one all set up, what we call a standby diver. In case that guy gets into trouble, we can throw that guy in the outfit, and he goes down, jumps down the water to help the guy out. And that's me at Holker Dam in Wolf Creek. That's where I actually met Cindy. And this right here on the whiteboard is an article that she wrote. She lived in Wolf Creek, Montana, which is about 5 minutes from Holter Dam, just north of Helena. And she wrote a little Wolf Creek journal up there, monthly journal, and found out that there was a dive crew working on the dam. And she came up and asked if she could take pictures and write a little story about it. And so I told her that was fine. So she took a few pictures. You can probably roll through some. That's me jumping into the water. So she did a little article on it, and that's how we met. And I went down to her place to help her write the article, and she made chocolate milkshakes, and it was all over after that. So, and that's the backside of the dam. Oh no, this is Milltown outside of Missoula, which that dam had an issue. They made it kind of funny, so it floated, and they didn't attach it to the bedrock or anything. It was built back when I think around 1903 or something like that, and they just made cribs out of railroad ties and filled it with rocks and then poured concrete on top of it. Thought that was good. So the dam itself actually floated and moved downstream. It's been taken out since then, but it was in service for over 100 years. But it leaked a lot, so we'd have to go down and fill leaks. We put gravel. We put it was part of Montana Power Company's dams, which they own Pole Strip, which was it's a coal-fired plant, and so all their ash and cinders, they would use that to all their dams, spread around all their dams, and that's what we use to seal the leaks. We just dump that. And let's see, that is, okay, yeah, that's still there. So yeah, that's the trailer we used. Had our dive crew set up inside a trailer, so we could keep everything hooked up, and made it really quick to get on site. And all we had to do is put our helmets on and pull the generator out and start it up, and we were good to go, which saves a lot of money. It makes the customer really happy. And that's a dive station. Just shows we usually wore a TV or a camera on our head, so there's a TV there, and then it has the pressure gauges and depth gauges to so we can keep in charge or keep in check of how deep the diver was and how much air he had going to him. That's me getting dressed in, getting ready to go to the dam. Down. Same dam. That's me jumping in the water again. We use ladders to come out of the water, but we usually jump in. It's a lot faster to jump in the water. Yeah. And that's a tender on there. There's a lot of stuff down under the water and divers can get snagged up on. And we have a hose that attaches to the helmet and goes up to the surface that has hardwire communication, and it has air coming from an air compressor. So we basically have an unlimited supply of air. So we can stay down. We use the Navy decompression tables, but we can stay down. If we're at 35 or 40 feet, we can stay down there 8 or 9, 10 hours. It doesn't matter. I try to keep my guys in the water only about 4 hours, because 4 hours in the water, you're really tired. And we'd rotate. On the 8-hour day, one guy would dive in the morning and one guy would dive in the afternoon. But we'd have to have a tender out there to hold our hose and make sure it wasn't getting snagged on anything, so we could get back to the surface without any issues. That's me climbing out of the water. And that's another job. We were at Priest Lake, Idaho. We were salvaging logs for the Forest Service, actually, because they float the logs down the river, and then they have a big, huge, log jams where they'd store them, and then, they're getting them out on shore. And lots of them sink. And they didn't used to worry about it because they had logs we had more and more logs than we needed. But about 20 years ago, they started deciding, looked into it, and there's a lot of timber under the water, and it's usable timber. And so I spent almost the whole summer just pulling logs out of Priest Lake. And that's what all that is. So that's climbing out of the water, yeah. That's me as a supervisor. I drank a lot of Mountain Dew back then. I drank like a case a day, actually. And then after that, shortly after that, in 2005 or so, I went down to the Gulf of Mexico, and that boat is the Boa Deep Sea. It was a purpose-built boat for diving and ROV operations. ROV is remotely operated vehicles. They're submarines, but they're unmanned. They're kind of like the drones, but they're made to go underwater. But that boat was purpose-built for that. And I spent about 3 years on that boat, on and off. I'd go down for a month and then come back. So I was month on, month off. So my month off, I could either work other dive jobs or I could take a vacation, and that's usually what I did. Go motorcycle riding. That's the back of the ship, and it's hard to see the details of it. There's the dive package. The yellow thing in the middle is what the divers went down on. And it was also a sat boat. We did saturation diving on this, which means that divers get locked into a little metal tube and they get pressurized for 28 days. And they stay pressurized, and we have a bell, and there'll be some more pictures here showing. let's see, that's a dive stage, sort of the surface diver. That's me actually going down in the moon pool in that. Because this boat we had capabilities for both surface diving and saturation diving. And that right there is me standing next to the bell. That dive bell was two divers would fit into that. And it would attach to the saturation living chamber. So the divers would climb into that bell that you can see through that little hatch. And then we'd lower the bell down to the workstation, and they'd climb out and go to work. And they would stay in that bell for a minimum 8 hours, because we'd have two divers in there. So they'd go down for 8 hours. One guy would go out for 4 hours, come back in, and the next guy goes out for 4 hours. And then they come up and swap out those two guys and send. So we do round the clock diving. And if we didn't have 3 teams of divers, if we only had 2, then they had to do 12-hour shifts. So they'd go in there for 12 hours, go down, each guy would do 6 hours in the water. None of the guys like that very much. And that's me. We cleaned the stuff a lot, and it gets pretty dirty and nasty. And yeah, and then I was a life support tech when we were doing sat diving. And so I was in charge of keeping the atmosphere good and clean. I had to scrub the O2, replenish their oxygen, keep the oxygen helium level at the right ratio. So that all those gauges and stuff for all the different analyzers and controls that I had to do all that kind of stuff. And I worked 12-hour shifts. And when we're offshore, we work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. We had 2 crews, and a day crew and a night crew. But our day started at noon. Day crew was noon to midnight, and night crew was midnight to noon. And I usually did the noon to midnight crew. And so this is a little slideshow that a friend of mine put together. It's about 4 or 5 minutes, and it's just the big diving thing. So we'll watch that. In Gulf of Mexico, yeah. So it started out with Hurricane Ivan. And then while we were down there working, cleaning up Hurricane Ivan's mess, Hurricane Rita hit, or Katrina hit. And then a month after Katrina was Rita. So it was not a good year to be down there. So that's what happened. Those are the damaged oil rigs, and that's what we went down there for, was to deconstruct the damaged oil rigs. And that's the boat that we were watching. So. And those are the tubes. Those are the tubes of helium. Yeah. The biggest wave when we were on that boat, the biggest wave that we had was a 38-foot high wave, and it washed over the deck. It's a huge boat. That boat's 400 feet long. It washed 6 feet of water went over the deck, and everything that was loose got washed overboard. And that was during Katrina. And lots of people think, oh, that's scary. And so it's like, there might be something wrong with me, but I always thought that's kind of fun. I mean, if you're out in the middle of the ocean, the bigger the waves, the better. Yeah, that's the living chamber. So it took, and that's the helium that we used. And that's a living chamber. That's one of the bells. But it would take, we'd have 4 or 6 guys in the dive chamber that are actually doing the diving. And it would take 36 people, a 36-man crew, to support those divers. And we went offshore on helicopters, which isn't normal. There was so much work after Katrina hit that they just started flying us back and forth with helicopters because it was too far offshore for the boats. It wasn't practical. Mm-hmm. So we got it, which was really nice because when I first started diving, helicopters, only the supervisors and the company owners got helicopters. But during this work, everybody got out on helicopters. And Global Diving was a company that I worked for mostly down there. He was a superintendent friend of mine. And that's one of the divers underwater. That's inside the bell. And now to come to the higher, that's wild well control. That's inside the diving the chamber actually. And that's the diver under the water. That's the bell going into the water. That's all the gas that we use, and that's my panel. That's inside the living chamber. Now those living chambers are about 14 feet in diameter. 14 feet in diameter and about 20 feet, maybe 24 feet long. So the guys who go down in there, they're locked in there for 28 days minimum. And they did a rotation the same. They do 28 days on and 28 days off. But the divers, it was worse for them because they had to decompress out. And the decompression is, it basically you can figure it's a day of decompression for every 100 feet you're down. And this job we were on 500-600 feet. So it would take them, if they were 600 feet, 6 days plus a day. It's always 100 feet plus a day. So 600 feet, it takes 7 days of decompression. So they only get 28 days off. That's 7 days of decompression counted as their time off. So they, like the rest of us get 4 weeks at home, those guys got 3 weeks at home. But they got paid a lot better than we did. That's all the ship's crew. There was 200 people on that ship. There's all the service people and stuff, and they were all there basically just to support us divers. Yeah, Ronnie Taylor, he died while we were on that job. He just had a heart attack. We haven't been on the job 6 months. And the companies that I work for and myself personally have very few accidents. It can be a pretty dangerous job, but if everybody knows what they're doing and pays attention to what they're doing, there's no reason for anybody to actually die from diving. It happens, but it doesn't need to. That guy, he's waiting for a clamp to come down. And sometimes we see sea life. Those are turtle girls. When we're out offshore, the turtles are endangered species and we can't mess with them. And we're actually not supposed to be diving at turtles. So when the turtles would come by, they'd send out these turtle girls, which are marine biologists. We call them turtle girls, but they're marine biologists, and they would come out and to count the sea turtles and see what kind they were. And if they needed any help, we'd help them out. But basically, they were there to tell us not to mess with the turtles. Yeah, and that guy, he's about 500 feet under the water. Yeah, that was the bottom of the oil. So. And then, so I did work down there for 3 years straight almost. And then the work slowed down. Actually, what happened is Obama got elected president and he shut down all that oil field work. So then I went back to working on dams. It was an interesting thing with the commercial diving, with the politics. It depends whether we didn't really care if it was a Republican or Democrat. It didn't affect what happened. The way it would affect our work is if there's a Republican in office, there's lots of oil field work going on. So we, do that, and there'd be repair on bridges and dams if it needed to be done. Democrats would get into office and shut down the oil field work, but then they'd start to say, okay, we need new bridges built, or we need this repaired, that repaired, we need dam work. So then we'd go inland and start working on, do all the inland stuff. And one thing my dad was talking to me, he used to complain about the price of gas going up, fuel, gasoline, and it's like, he always asked me why I was never bothered with this, because if it goes up, I get more work, because I open up the oil rigs, and so it's like, I actually, made more money. So and that was during Katrina, the waves, it's just, the seas were incredible out there when Katrina hit. And so then we started doing dam work, and this job was in Colorado, actually at Cheeseman Dam, just kind of southeast of Denver, not very far. It's about an hour out of Denver, I think. And it's the bottom of that dam project was 200 feet. So we were doing saturation job on this because 200 feet, and it's just not practical to use a surface applied diver. Surface applied could go down to 200 feet and work maybe 40 minutes and then have to do 6 or 7 hours of decompression. So, and it was just too expensive, and you'd be going through divers like crazy to do a 200-foot job. So they bid this on saturation. So we brought all this gear up from the Gulf of Mexico and set up a sat job on the lake on barges, so floating right behind the dam, working at 200 feet. And we did the same thing. We had 3 teams of 2 divers go in there. And so that's actually what we call the transfer lock. And the bell would lock onto that, and the divers would climb into it and get lowered into the lake. And there was a gate that needed to be rebuilt, so we went down there to rebuild the gate. You can go to the next picture. And that's just our dive hoses for surface supply, because we always have surface supply diver whenever we do sat diving, just in case we need to send a diver down for something. And that's Cindy inside the sat chamber, the living chamber, just to give you an idea of how small they were. But she's short. Most of our divers are around 6 foot. Cindy's only like 5'2" or 3. So it looks bigger with her. But there's 4 bunks you can see. There's 2 bunks. She's sitting on one bunk, and then the 2 bunks up there that are raised up. And yeah, that chamber is about 14 foot in diameter. Cindy got on this job as a cook. We had a hard time finding cooks to stay with us, on the work. And so they said, if anybody knows anybody that can cook, give them. So I told them, well, and my wife might be willing. And so she did. She came out and worked for a couple months down there. They all loved their food, actually, so it was really good. And then this is just outside of Billings. This is on the Yellowstone River. There's an Exxon pipeline that, there's actually several pipelines that go across the river, and the river's on this area. It's by Laurel, actually, right outside of Laurel. And it's bedrock there, so they can drill under, put the pipes under, so they're right on the river bottom. And then they cover them with gravel or dirt or whatever, sandbags. But what happened is there was an ice flow around Yellowstone Park, I think, and the ice dam broke. And all this ice stuff came in and knocked out 2 of these pipelines. And I don't know if you guys heard about that. When was that? It was like 2011. Okay, 2011. It was in the news. I'm sure you guys might have heard about it, where the oil spill in the river and everybody's all been out of shape about it. Anyway, they shut it down. Anyway, we got called in to repair the pipeline. And so that's what we're doing. These guys, the job was supposed to start in June, but Exxon's kept pushing off, no big deal. And they're based down in Louisiana. So they think it doesn't matter what time you can do dive work any old time of year. And me and a couple other guys you guys got to get this ball rolling. And, it's like they kept pushing off in August. We told them, man, if we don't do this job, it's not going to get done. And none of them, they didn't listen to us. They didn't actually start the job until the end of September. So this is in November. It's a 6-month job. So now it's going to go through the winter. So this is in November, and it's like, yeah, it snows. And it's like, they had little porta potties all over the place, thinking no big deal. I said, I told the Exxon guys, nobody's going to be able to use these. They're all going to freeze solid. And they thought I was nuts. It's like, yeah, it's like, you got to get heaters in them if you want us to use them. And they didn't believe me until they also froze solid. And then it took them 2 days to get heaters and electrical cords spread. But yeah, so they brought boats up, airboats, to skim across the water. And we told them, yeah, you're going to have to do something, because they're not going to start in the morning. And they just didn't. It took them about 3 months to get it through their head that we knew what we were talking about. But by then the job was half over. So. Let's see. Oh, okay. And then after that, I went back down to the Gulf. That one's 2000. Wow. Yeah, it was the same. So that's okay. But that's a Billy Pugh, and it's what after when they started to work back up in the Gulf again, there wasn't all the money there, so we weren't doing helicopters anymore. Now they're shipping us back out on ships like we used to do. So what they do is when you come out on the ship, they have this Billy Pugh that hooks on a crane, and it's basically it's just a round disc with rope on it, and so you get 4 guys would climb onto it with the crane hanging, and 4 guys would jump onto it, and the crane would pick it up and move it over to the dive barge, and they go back and forth that way. But there's a lot of waves and stuff. It was kind of a hairy deal. And it was at night. They try to do it at night a lot. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's the barge. Can you see? Yeah, you can see those are big shackles. We were doing rigging because we were picking up the pieces of the oil rigs. We'd go down there and burn them up in pieces that were handleable that we could, and then we'd hook them up with those shackles. And those were actually some of the smaller shackles we were using. But the shackle pin is the thing that goes in between those holes. And the shackle pin on those shackles weighed 95 pounds. And so a diver, we'd have to go down and hook that up. They'd lift that stuff down with the crane. We'd shackle it up, and then we'd have to take the shackle pin and push it in. So the diver has to pick up the shackle pin himself and push it in and twist it in there. So it's a lot of physical labor. Yes. And that's what you can see the damage over. I mean, the hurricane just bent up and twisted everything. So they get like that, and we'd take them out. Cut them. We'd go down under the water. That's like this guy's. I think he's actually hooking up a rig or part of the crane to it. But we'd go down there and we use underwater welders and with burning rod, and we'd burn the steel. And so we'd hook it up to the crane first, and then we'd burn the steel off. And when it was free, then the crane could pick it up out of the water. And that's one of the clamps. That clamp, how much does it weigh? 400 pounds for the clamp that goes on there. Yeah, well, yeah. It could be 7. Some of them, like some of them were 400 pounds a piece, or 700 each piece. There are 2-piece clamps, so each piece is 350 or 400 pounds. And those we lowered down with the crane, and the diver would have to go down there and kind of hold them together. We use come-alongs a lot and pull them together and then bolt them up. It's kind of hairy work, but I think that's, how does it say how deep that one is? 193 feet. Oh, 101 feet. Yeah. This is offshore quite a ways. The water's clear offshore. Close to the beach, it's pretty dirty, but out here, I think we're like 50 or 60 miles offshore on that one. So the water was a lot clearer. That doesn't matter. Yeah, that's just more. It was a lot of fun. And that's one of the pieces that we cut out. It's clamped up at the top. And the diver would go down after it's clamped at the top, go down and burn the bottom legs off. It was underwater, kind of like a gas torch, except we used an electric welder. And that's loading the piece on the barge. So, and that's me. Right after I got out of the water, first thing I got to have is a Mountain Dew. Kept me going down there, kept me going everywhere. That's getting into the suit. And that's some of the wildlife we'd see. Not really. Those ones, that kind of octopus you see up and around Seattle, not down in the Gulf of Mexico. But I just like that big. That's a top package. It's the top part of the oil rig where the guys would actually has all the valves and stuff that we do. And so those are pretty easy to cut off because you can see the other part of it's there. But we didn't use divers for that. They'd go, the regular riggers would run out there, rig up to it, and then they burn off the stuff with a regular burning torch, acetylene torch, cut all that stuff off and lift it off. So that's what they were doing on the surface. And then after they got the top package off, we'd go down and take the rest of it out. And then after that, I got into tunneling with the tunnel boring machines. I don't know if any of you have heard of those. But they have, I know Elon Musk, maybe you guys heard of that. He was making a tunnel to go around Las Vegas or something. But they have these, and they're all over the place. They use them for putting in pipelines, for putting in water lines. This one was in New York City, and it was a tunnel boring machine that would make a concrete pipe 14 feet in diameter, and it was for their water supply going under the New York Harbor there from. Well, yeah, because they built the original water pipe was built back in the 20s, and it failed. The boat hit it actually, because it wasn't underground. It went along the bottom of the bay, and a boat actually drug its anchor across the pipe and broke the pipe. So then all of the city in Manhattan, I think it was, lost their water. So they got this price. So what we do is they use a tunnel boring machine, and it actually goes under the mud. It bores under, and there was 50 feet of water and 50 feet of mud, so we were 100 feet underneath. And they have to use diver. They cut the mud, and when they're drilling the hole, they have like a drill bit on the front, giant drill bit, however big the machine is. This one was 14 feet in diameter. So they have these cutting teeth on the heads, and they wear out after a while. About every month or month and a half, they have to be replaced. And it's under pressure. There's water, it's mud and rock or whatever. There's a water table there. So they use divers to pressurize the front of the thing, and divers would go in there and change out the teeth. So that's what we're doing. Anyway, this is I think we're about 3 miles under going through it. So it's a concrete camp. It's dark in there. So, but that's the concrete tunnel is a tube, and we go down there, and for like it was 14 miles long, I think, but at this point we're 3 miles in. So we travel down there, and then at the front of the tunnel boring machine, so it's inside, so it's behind the actual cutter part, is the entrance, and that door is what divers would go through into there, and we close that door and then pressure the system up for them, and then they climb through another door like that and change out these teeth, which the cutting teeth weighed between 40 and 80 pounds, depending on how big they were. And that's the control is the same sort of controls as in the SAT system. We'd have to regulate their gas and their pressure, and that's the control board for that. And that's one of the doors. You can see the guy back in there, 2 doors in. He's climbing through the hole. And this is one from Seattle. That gives you that's the front of a tunnel boring machine. That's actually only the top half. This is the one that in Seattle they replaced the Alaskan highway on the Seattle Wharf, by Pike's Place Market. So they basically put a highway under the ground, and I think it ended up being 7 miles long. And it took them 8 or 9 years to do it because they ran into some issues. And this is after 2 years they ran into an issue. The tunnel boring machine got stuck. So they had to dig it out from the surface, so it gives you a good picture. As you can see the guy standing there, that tunnel boring machine the outside of it is 56 feet in diameter. It made a tunnel that was 54 feet in diameter, because they have 2 lanes. They have 3 levels, and they have a north-south highway on one level, and the north highway on one level, south going on the other, and then they had a 3rd level for the buses and stuff that was just for the metro buses. But yeah, just so you can see all the white things alongside the jagged thing. Those are the cutting teeth, and that's what the divers would replace. And they're held in usually by either 2 or 4 bolts. And so we'd have to. And if this normally is underground and there's water and all kinds of stuff in there, and so the diver would be out there unbolting that and putting the new teeth, pulling the old teeth off and putting the new teeth on, basically with hand wrenches. And let's see. Okay, and then after that, I went to Saudi Arabia, worked in the Persian Gulf. So it was more of the oil well deconstruction we were doing. And it was there in August, and it was really hot. And you can see that's the deck temperature. In the shade, it was 134 degrees in the shade. You couldn't touch anything. You couldn't leave anything metal on the deck because it would just be too hot. It'd get really hot really fast. And it was the average temperature, air temperature was like 110 to 120 degrees. So all my crew, they could only work 20 minutes. So you come and work for 20 minutes, I have to send them inside for 10 minutes to cool off and drink. We had a fairly large crew to rotate everybody around to do that. The water temperature was 95 degrees at the surface. It was 95 degrees at the surface, and we were diving about 160 feet. And down at the bottom, it was still 70 degrees. And that's me getting into the water. When I was a supervisor by this time, but I always liked to be one of the first divers in to go down and see what the dive conditions were like. So I did one usually did one of the first dives just to go see. And so that's me getting, we use the stage, we call that a diver stage, to lower us into and out of the water. Because we were working on a drill rig, and the drill rig was about 80 feet above the water. So we'd hang over the water, that thing go down 80 feet before we even touch the water. And then that's what sunset. Then can you show that other video? We posted in Gordia. That's my homemade dive hat. Me and a couple dive friends, dive buddies, had a big little, I don't know, there's a couple young guys, and they decided they wanted to make their own dive hat. And so about 2 days before they were having their little show, they asked me if I wanted to make one, so I whipped that one out. Okay, so then I also worked on the Costa Concordia, which is an Italian ship that wrecked off the coast of Italy, just north of Rome. That was, yeah, that's the right one. It was 2012. Yeah, it was a pretty big deal because there was a brand new boat, and they were leaving, I think, Rome, and coming out, and the guy that was piloting the boat, he wasn't the captain. The captain had a girlfriend, and he was in the captain, had her in the bunk. And so he put the second in command in charge, and the second in command had a girlfriend that lived on this island. And so he thought he'd take the ship in close so she could be on the beach and he could wave to her. Well, he took it too close, and there were some big rocks, and it grounded on the rocks. And brand spanking new ship. This was its maiden cruise. And so you want to start that? This will.
And removing the ship has turned out to be the most complicated, the most expensive, the most daunting, and the riskiest salvage operation ever.
The story will continue in a moment.
Yeah. This is the. You need to turn it up. You need to turn it up.
The swimming pools of cities where passengers sunbathed and sipped cocktails are now empty and askew. A clock
Yes, it is.
time marking the hour and minute the ship lost power.
So those are the rocks that it mashed.
Just because the ship's contents littered the ocean floor in what the Italian authorities have designated an official crime scene. 30 people died. Nick Sloan from South Africa was the senior. 30 people died. 2 are still missing. Sorry about the volume. Nick Sloan from South Africa is the senior salvage master. He took us out to the wreck site. How big is that ship?
It's huge. What you see is one 35% foot, so 65%, I believe, is like iceberg.
Now the plan is to roll the 60,000-ton ship.
This is a computer drawing of what they planned on doing. And what I did, my crew, we worked on building that platform.
So you're planning to rotate a ship that weighs 60,000 tons?
Yeah.
All right, so let me see, this is the ship. You have to do it like the
Roll it up, right.
whole thing together at once, creaking.
All the way along, 3 football fields long.
3 football fields long.
Yeah, we're going to rotate a little more at the time.
It sounds like an experiment in defying the laws of physics. The actual work is being shared by Nick Sloan's Titan Salvage, an American wreck removal company, and Me Coperi, an Italian engineering firm. Sergio Girotto is the company's project director in charge of refloating a 60,000-ton ship filled with seawater. So you have to create much more buoyancy than even the original weight of the ship because of all the water.
Absolutely.
A team of engineers came up with something ingenious to, in effect,
There was 5,000 people on the ship when it wrecked. And like they said, 30 of them died. And there was a lot of seniors, a lot of older people our age and stuff. And they all the ones that survived, everybody survived by jumping off the ship, and they swam to shore. Because you can see it was really close. And it was in January, it was in the middle of winter, and the water's not super warm. So there was a handful of them that just couldn't take the temperature change. But you can see it's right there.
Joined together like a big Lego outside in the open.
And they have to be precisely welded, correct?
The space from one sponson to the other, it is less than 2 inches. So they must be fabricated with a very strict tolerance.
This row of hydraulic pulleys will tighten a string of 36 cables attached to the sponsons, slowly rolling the ship upright.
So we had to drill holes in the ground to put those posts in for that platform. And then we had to fill in concrete bags in between where the platform was and the beach. And so the concrete bag part is the part that I was most involved in. And they're going to show, they have some really good video of that. That's why I wanted to show this video.
Brand new technology, brand new methodology to lift a vessel in this way. It is the first time ever.
And no one's 100% sure of lifting a vessel this gigantic in one piece is going to work. It's the biggest passenger ship ever wrecked, twice the size of the Titanic. Just a year ago, it was a 15-story floating palace, big enough to house a small town of 4,000 people. As this promotional video shows, it had 1,500 luxury cabins, 18 restaurants and bars, 4 swimming pools, 5 jacuzzis, and a casino. The accident occurred this past January, ominously on the night of Friday the 13th. Nervous passengers crowded together as water gushed in. Sailing too close to shore, the ship had struck a huge boulder hidden just beneath the surface.
But you can see that it just tore the pipes apart.
Yeah, the momentum of a large ship like this hitting that rock. Yeah, like
Like almost like a shark eating the belly of a whale or something. It just ate into that.
Yeah, it was a big rock, about 96 tons.
The wreck's an eyesore right off the beaches of tiny Giglio Island that has been overrun with an armada of support vessels and an army of welders, crane operators, and marine engineers. Because of the angle of the ship, the workers have to take a 4-day course in mountain climbing. Here they're working on the strong cables that are keeping the ship in place. Much of the work is being done underwater by specially trained salvage divers, 111 in all. Ivano, who's from Brazil, is being geared up and safety checked by other divers on his team.
So he's got communication, we're talking, he's got the air, he's got backup air, he's got a camera and a lights.
Everyone who goes in has a support team of at least 5 up on deck. Once suited up, Ivano is lowered down in a cage. The day we were there, the divers were ratcheting, tightening, measuring those massive steel cables that run under and around the ship to tie it down so it doesn't slide off the mountain peaks and sink. It's an exacting and dangerous job. So teammates stand by on deck in case of an emergency, and a dive supervisor monitors and directs the action.
You want to look back on your camera, give us a wide shot of exactly what's going on down there?
Wayne Monster Morsener oversees the dive team.
So you're just watching everything that's listening to him.
And explaining to him exactly where to go, because sometimes when you go past 30 meters, you can get narcosis, and it sort of affects your thinking. And obviously, if there's trouble, I can see what the problems are and help him out and check his depth, that sort of thing.
There's a salvage diver's camaraderie. They live in close quarters in floating barracks next to the ship. And while they come from 8 different countries, speaking different languages, they're like soldiers in combat. They have each other's back.
And move towards the bow across the Concordia, please.
Though these divers are in the water round the clock, each one can stay under no longer than 45 minutes at a time. They have 5 minutes to get from a depth of 40 feet into a decompression chamber. When a diver surfaces, it's a race to strip off his gear and get into the chamber. The divers and everyone else work round the clock, 7 days and nights a week, in a race against time. They have to remove the ship before storms like this one last month break it apart.
Every storm weakens the structure, and there'll be a certain point where the structure is sure to have enough.
So is that what has you worried the most, the weather?
Yeah, we need it back.
That's about all the diving that really shows, you know. You can watch the rest of it. But I just like this video because it had really good visuals of what the divers are doing and showed about when we do surface diving, getting into the chamber. And that's the main reason that we tried to do SAT. This job could have been done SAT and the divers could stay down for 4 hours, in each 4 hours at a time, and it would be a lot more work to get done. But this job, the Costa Concordia, there were 6 different dive teams. Well, there's 6 different, dive barges, and we had teams running. We were doing 12-hour shifts, so there's a lot of divers there. And there were 6 different countries that owned the dive companies that were doing the work, and then of course they used divers from all over the place. But so I was working with an American crew, and we had a Canadian crew and a Dutch crew and an Italian crew all on our barge. And then like on the other side of the ship was 2 teams of Italian divers, and another barge had 2 teams of English divers. And we all got along really well, all of us, divers. That's kind of a small group. But that was a pretty incredible job. And then
They had to haul that wreckage all the way down past the boot and all the way back up.
yeah, it was over by Rome, Ilha Giglio. And so I got floated all the way to Venice. So they had to float it all. It took them 2 months, I think, to get it all the way from after it was floating into Venice. But so that was a pretty fun job. And then after that, I started doing more tunneling jobs again. My last tunneling job was actually in Egypt. The Egyptian government had 3 tunnels dug under the Suez Canal. Well, 6 actually, 2 down south and 2 up north, or 3, 3 up north. And so 2 of them were train tunnels, and then the other 4 were highway tunnels, so that they could get across the canal easier, faster. And that was the last job I did. I think that's about it. Anybody have any questions?
You did life insurance.
I actually, I was a member of a union out of Seattle. So no, you don't get hazard pay, but I was a member of the union, so I had a good insurance, really good insurance, and a good retirement program from that. Yeah.
The divers, did they have specialties, like somebody that was catting somebody else that was deconstructing, or did you have to pretty much know it all?
A good diver is a jack of all trades. We used to say, jack of all trades, master of none. But there are some specialties. There used to be what we call hyperbaric welders, which those guys weren't divers. So what we would do, like back in the 70s and early 80s, when there was a lot of new oil rig stuff going in the Gulf of Mexico and the North Sea, they'd put in the rig, and then the oil pipes would have to be. So divers would go down and set up these boxes, make these that would be, a quarter the size of this room. We'd build a metal box and weld it onto this thing and onto the pipe or around it. And then we'd escort welders down, and we'd get the welders into the box, and we'd pump the box dry so that these welders are working in a dry area. So those would be actual, and they're hyperbaric welders, weren't divers. And but divers should be able to do everything. There are inspection divers that all they do is do inspections. They run like magnetometers or do different kinds of non-destructive testing. So there's guys that specialize in that. Most of us are basically construction divers, so we're like an underwater laborer. We have to do whatever we have to do. There are some guys that specialize in doing nothing but concrete work underwater. But mostly everybody had to do everything.
You said that in 10 years you were the only one still doing it. Why were the other people leaving? What was the reasons they left the profession?
Well, when we're in dive school, everybody's told they're going to be a diver, and they have these dreams. Everybody thinks divers make tons of money, and then when you're a young guy, and it's like, oh, exciting life. So you're going to have tons of money. You're going to drive big race cars or fast cars. Women are going to be climbing all over you, all this kind of stuff, right? That's kind of like the rumor. And it's not that way. You go out and typically you start diving, you have to be a tender, which is just one of the guys that hangs on the deck and supports the diver. That takes 2 to 4 years of doing that before you even get to be a diver. So guys would get upset, they think I'm gonna be a diver, and then they go out and they have to, what we call choke hose, just support the diver and hold his hose and stuff, and they get upset because they're not being a diver right away. Or the big thing is, like, always, one of our jokes in the diving industry is, where do you find diver in the dictionary? Right in between despair and divorce. It's because the jobs, you work for one company, but the jobs aren't steady. You do a job, and the job can be anywhere from 3 days to 2 or 3 months, maybe 6 months long. When that job's done, you don't know what you're doing next. The job's over. Now you got to do. It's kind of like construction, so the jobs would be spotty. And then diving work there's not as much of it as there is construction. So you might go several months without work. Well, some guys just can't handle that kind of stuff. And then it's really hard on the family because you're working out of, away from the house all the time. It's rare that I worked a lot in Spokane. I lived in Spokane for a while, and there were 5 dams around Spokane, and I actually worked on those a lot. So I was lucky to get some work there. And then Great Falls, there's 5 dams just out of Great Falls. So when I was living in Helena, I did a lot of work. There was actually, within 150 miles of Helena, there were 10 dams that I consistently worked on. So I could go and work for 3 days, maybe a week. I was always home on the weekends, which was rare for most divers. So it's really hard on the family, just because if you're lucky and you get month on month off, you're still away from your family for a whole month. And some families just can't handle that. But those are the biggest reasons for that.
When hurricanes go through, do you have to wait until a hurricane is done before you go out and do the work on these?
It really depends there's different size boats that we're on. When we're on the boat at deep sea, it was dynamically positioned, which means it uses satellite for positioning. And I was offshore. I was on the boat when Katrina hit, and we were working on an oil rig, and Katrina was coming through, so we're watching it. And when it got too close, where the waves started getting too big, what we did on our boat was we just sailed away from that, got far enough away from the hurricane, so it wouldn't bother us too much. Let it pass, and as soon as it passed, we went right back in, right behind it. So we only missed 2 days of work for that. We worked. No, we get everybody up on the water. So it was like a 2-day vacation for the divers. When we're moving, we get everybody up and out of the water and move away and not really doing anything. So we're just hanging out in the boat. Yeah. So a wave is kind of like a circle. So if it's 30 feet high, there's that much energy 30 feet below. So it does this kind of circular thing. And then what it does is and then it makes smaller circles underneath. So if it's 30 feet, because we work in rough seas all the time. So if it's a 30-foot wave, 30 feet down, there's just as much energy as there is at the surface. And then you cut that circle in half and you go 15 feet, now it's half as much. So there's half as much energy there. And then another 7 feet down below that is half as much of that. So by the time you get down to like 100 feet or 150 feet below, it's fine. Yeah, yeah. So if we're working, anything over like 150 feet, we don't care what the weather's like up top.
What's the deepest that you've gone?
Deepest I personally know, it's 365 feet, but myself in the water. I did a lot of SAT jobs where I was a life support tech and a SAT supervisor. We were working in 700-800 feet of water.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. One of them had to do with when you're in that wait time. You said that you work for 4 hours and then you wait 4 hours.
Yeah.
What do the divers do in the 4 hours that they're waiting?
They're basically paying attention to what their partner's doing. Because we always have to have a standby diver, And so he's sitting there, they eat their lunch. I mean, they take their lunches down with them, so they get to eat lunch. And sometimes they take books down or magazines down and read that, but they have to pay attention to what their partner's doing out in the water and listening to the supervisor, because they could hear, we had hardwired communication, so they could hear the conversations going on between the supervisor and the diver.
The second question I have has something to do with the two talking about the waves. But when you were in the river of Montana during the time, what kind of temperature was in that river and how did that affect your ability to function if it was that cold?
Okay, on that one, the temperature, water temperature there was 29 to 30 degrees. And the only reason it wasn't I mean, there were huge ice falls floating down the river. There's ice jams, there's snow, and there's always ice on top of the river. But because the water's moving, it wouldn't freeze. And when we're diving in water, typically, if the water's colder than 40 degrees, we have what we call hot water suits. And so it's like kind of an oversized wetsuit, and it has surgical tubing full of holes, and we pump hot water into it. And we could raise that temperature. We could get that temperature up to 120 degrees. We typically did it at 108 degrees because that would mix with the water that we're in and be real comfortable to work in. That's how we deal with that.
If that cold, how are you operating the equipment with your hands?
Well, we have one of the water tubes comes out right at the wrist, and we have gloves on, so it would pump the hot water right into the gloves. And it was still cold, but it wasn't as cold as if we were wearing bare hands.
You referred to a bailout bottle early on,
Uh-huh.
and how, I assume that was the emergency escape when you get up. How deep can you be before you can't use that? Because you can't just shoot up.
Right, you can't, then the bailout bottle, right. If we're doing decompression diving, SURDO2, we usually have a dive stage, which would have two bottles of, two giant bottles, K bottles full of gas. And the bailout bottle would be enough to get you to that stage and where you could plug your hat into the other surface. If we're diving, because with sat divers wear bailout bottles too, and the bailout bottle, it was enough gas to get them back to the bell, so they would be pressurized. If we're diving like less than 200 feet, we would do surface decompression. So that bailout bottle would get you from the bottom to the surface, and then as soon as you got to the surface, we'd have to get you out of dive gear and put you in a decompression chamber, and then we'd pressurize you back down to the depth of like 40 or 50 feet, and then slowly decompress you from there. But typically a bailout bottle is good. It had to be good for at least 5 minutes, and that is depth dependent. So.
I was just wondering, what was the most scary time you've ever had? That there was a really good show going on. Were there many?
There's a few. Probably the scariest time I did a job down in Cozumel, and we were doing routine. There's a lot of work to be done. So we had a crew that we're doing some surface applied and some scuba diving, and which is weird. You shouldn't mix scuba diving with commercial diving, but this job we needed to get a lot done. And when it was my turn to go scuba diving, what we do is I take that hat actually and plug it into a scuba bottle. So I'd only have an hour's worth of air, more or less. And I got in the water and I was doing my job and I forgot that I was on scuba because I was wearing my hat. I thought that I was on surface supply and had unlimited supply, and I ran out of air, and you can feel it. It's your hat kind of squishes down on your head. And I looked up at the surface. I was 65 feet down. I was like, man, I didn't have fins, and it's like I cannot swim to the surface. But the boat, I was close to the boat anchor, and so I ran over to the boat anchor and started climbing my way up the boat anchor. But now I was completely out of air, and your body forces you to breathe. So I sucked in, and I got a mouthful of water. I thought I was going to die, but I made it to the surface and started banging on the bottom of the boat. And the guy in the boat, he took my helmet off, and that's probably the scariest time I think I ever had. But I've had a couple other close calls. I was working on a bridge in Spokane, and they had a construction bridge underneath the bridge where they dive the cranes, and so it's a temporary bridge, and they use I-beams, H-beams that go up and support the working deck. And when they were done with that, we were down there cutting the bottoms off, and they had a boat on the surface that would go along and hook up to the H-beam, and then I'd cut the one that they're hooked up to. And then I'd call them over the radio. It's like, okay, this is burned, you can take it away. And so about the 5th pile over, I burned off the one that they said they were hooked up to, and they pulled up on the crane, and they pulled up on the next one that I hadn't cut yet, and the one they cut, it knocked it over and it fell across my dive hose, and I couldn't get back to the surface from that. So that one, I had to disconnect my hose from because the hose was trapped underneath the thing. So I had a crescent wrench with me, and I just disconnected the hose, went on my bailout, and climbed to the beach on my bailout bottle. So that was a little hairy too, but they hooked up to the wrong one because the one I was burning was below the water surface and they couldn't see it.
Did you ever have encounters with octopus or sharks?
Well, octopus, only on purpose when I was scuba diving. Commercial diving, I never did. And octopus, because I went diving looking for octopus. I never had anything bad. It was just amazing to see those. When I was working in the Gulf of Mexico, off Houston, I was working in really black water, and we were putting in some fiber optic cable, and it was pitch black. Couldn't see anything. I mean, it was black, and every time you move your feet, there's dyna flashlights that flash blue, and sometimes you see the bioluminescent stuff. So I see these blue sparkles all over the place, and I felt something when I was coiling up some hose on there. I felt something big hit me, like a log or something, bumped into me and knocked me over. And I didn't think too much of it. But then after my dive was up, I got back on the boat, and then we went back into the beach, and we were followed by a fishing boat that had some sports fishermen that were fishing right next to where we were. We tried to ask them to leave several times, but they didn't. But anyway, they were fishing. But they followed us back in because we had a little crane on our boat, and they asked us if we could help them unload the fish they caught. It was a 17-foot bull shark. So I figured the bull shark would, because what they do is they circle it there and then bump into it before they attack it. So I figured it was probably that bull shark that bumped me. And I couldn't see it because it was pitch black, which is probably a good thing. Yeah. Danica, you had a question?
Oh, you mentioned, I don't remember if it was your cutting or welding, but electricity and water don't mix, so how does that work?
Well, you have a good ground and stuff, so it does, I mean, it's not, electricity still flows through, like, what it takes the easiest route. And so electricity, as long as it's grounded, it doesn't do anything to the diver. So it goes from the generator, the welding machine, down the lead, and then through the whatever we're burning or welding, and then back to the ground, back up to the machine. So it's not an issue unless there's a fault in the ground or somewhere and there's a gap, then the diver gets shocked. And we've played jokes on each other with that kind of stuff sometimes. Yeah, because it's a big enough shock that makes you yell, you can't do anything about it. Yeah, we're kind of mean to each other sometimes. Yeah.
You had to really trust each other.
We did, yeah. We were a little team. We were, like family. It's just an unspoken thing. You take care of each other, and no man left alone. No man.
The different waters, lakes, rivers, and sea, how do they compare to each other? You have like current in Yellowstone, that seems like it'd be really tough.
It is, yeah. Sometimes the river currents are so strong you can't work into them. So what we do is we put deflectors, we build deflectors, that, so the current would go around us. But yeah, you have fresh water gets really cold. I mean, the coldest water I've ever been in was at the Madison River there by Yellowstone, on the other side of Yellowstone. That water was 28 degrees. We were diving in that, and seawater doesn't get that cold. Seawater gets down to like 33 or 30. It doesn't get colder than that. And seawater also has all kinds of, salts and all that, so you're super buoyant. So if you're diving in the sea, you need way more weight than you do if you're diving freshwater. Freshwater is way less buoyant. Currents, you get currents in the ocean just like you do in the rivers and lakes. In big lakes, you get currents too. But in the Gulf of Mexico, there's like the Gulf Stream, you hear about that all the time. You can actually see it. It looks like a river. And you can tell, you can be diving here outside of the Gulf Stream and get into it, and it'll drag you away. So the ocean currents, you have to worry about that.
Ted.
And-
Ted. I'm chasing you.
Yeah.
Let's give him a round of applause.
It can be a little dangerous, but it's as long as everybody knows what they're doing and everybody pays attention to their job, it's not.
Yeah. Well, it sounded like you loved your job.
I did. I was really fortunate.
Did you love his job? Sometimes. But I've heard that.
So if you guys want to get up close and touch the helmets, look at the helmets, you're welcome to do that.
So, and you'll see Sam around the building. He spends quite a bit of time here. We're so glad to have him and his wife Cindy. And so if you still got more questions, because there was a lot of things we could ask him about.
Yes.
We could keep going. So he'll be happy to answer those along the way. And yeah, take a look at his stuff there. I also wanted to just tease out, because any good announcer that's trying to do events would do this. Not only his program today, but Cindy has a whole story herself that's totally different. And so we're going to have her in a listen, laugh, and learn session. Maybe, she says. It's very good. So anyway, wonderful couple. Thanks for coming. We really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
How you doing, Bobby?
Go up here and see any of this stuff?
Yeah. How you doing?
I don't think I want to.
You ready to put on a pair of boots there?
Oh, yeah.
Excuse me, guys.
Yeah.
Have a good one. You too. I'm sorry. On your way.
You just got the best seat in the house there.
I made it work.
Oh, yeah. These are fun. It's sad that you don't fly away like tomorrow.
So this week is.
Monday. Tuesday. I know, I keep forgetting. Then they have her wait until.
Still with all that weight, still with weight. Wow. That just said it looks so good.
Yeah, we'll come down on Tuesday then. Well,
Thank you.
yeah.
I will be here.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Have a good rest of the week.
You too. And I tried to-